if we were to see something like that, you know what I'd love to see is, and Steam does this to a certain degree, you can find something like Good Old Games, right? You find, like, if Good Old Games made a box, and some of you talked about retro gaming, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but if we look at something like a Steam box, I'd love to see it play old PC games that are basically, honestly, almost abandonware, right? No one supports them anymore. The companies that made them are out of business. There's no need to make a new sequel, so on and so forth. Why not? And you couldn't even play that unless you had an old PC running something like Windows 95 or something like that, right? Why not be able to kind of update the engines that can emulate these games or can run, you know, some kind of hypervisor to be able to, you know, VMware style into these games, right? And be able to really play some of those old games on a new TV. It might be hideously ugly, but that's okay. Those companies are out of business. What I really love to see, you know, so it's not representing them poorly is what I mean by that. I really want to see an ability to go back and play some of those old catalog games because they're sitting on my shelf. I own them. I bought them. I'd even be willing to pay a few bucks to get them again. But if somebody could with all the programming prowess of people nowadays, why not be able to make some of those old great games on the PC that we all know and love? Or, you know, we've seen that a lot on consoles. We haven't seen it a lot for the PC. Why not take some of those old PC games and be able to put them into a set-top box that we can play with some kind of great compatibility, and to do it in some kind of really, I think, package that does really, really well, and it's very pretty to look at too. It's seamless, a la, you know, some of the great operating systems we see now, and some of the great dashboards like XBMC, for example. I would love to see that. Anyway, backwards compatibility is a huge part of the question for any console, let alone any new ones. Drastic talked about the idea that, I mean, Drastic is ready, okay? Ready for a new console, but it has to meet the requirement of being able to toss, PS Vita style, any game that you buy because of the horsepower and all the capabilities of our mobile platforms now. It needs to be able to throw the game that you buy for the console onto a mobile platform and back, and they need to be able to speak with each other by virtue of some kind of cloud service and or your own home cloud service, which it will never happen, but that's a different story. In any case, if I'm playing Progress on Skyrim, for example, and I get to a certain point, I want to be able to jump into Skyrim on my mobile device while I'm sitting and waiting for the bus in the morning, and whatever progress I make at that point, I want to then be able to jump right back in on the console version later on that day and start right from that point. Couldn't agree more. I think that's a fantastic feature. That being said, I think you're going to be waiting a while for it because it is not easy to do that, despite all the horsepower of the mobile platforms and despite how quickly that's moving. Because face it, we've got quad-core phones now, guys. There's very little these machines cannot handle these days. Because of, I mean, if you look at something like some of these new quad-core phones coming out, they basically resemble some of the very, very high-end PCs of only a generation or so ago. That is amazing, considering the small package, the lack of cooling, so on and so forth that those devices have. But I love the idea of being able to toss a game from the console to the mobile by virtue of saving all of your games in the cloud. You know, any of you that watch many of the weekly Ringers know that I love that idea and would love to see that and support it. Rabbit Frog talked about the ability to save anytime and continue as being a continuous driver. And I thought that was really a fantastic example, right? One of the things that mobile platforms are really doing very well right now, and also, I hate to say it, emulation platforms do really, really well in emulating some of the old games and being able to kind of jump in and out of some of those games without having to work within the mechanism of saving that was an original part of that game. Here's what I mean. If I'm going to play something, for example, Rabbit Frog talked about the original Final Fantasy. The only way that that game was completed was by really being able to say, okay, I have to go right now. I can't get to a save point. I'm not going to be able to save the game in the traditional sense of how this game wants me to, which used to be part of the challenge, right? Now I want to just be able to hit the button. It it saves my state, turns it off, and goes to sleep, and then when I pull it back up, I jump right into that same state. That is something I absolutely need. I don't necessarily need save states where I can go back and forth to other states like some of the emulators do. That's great, but it's also a little bit, it's almost like cheating, right? I mean, if you can save your state every time, you're just going to save your state and then reload until you get it right. In some cases, that's cheating, but for folks like me, who happen to be kind of old and who happen to kind of like those retro games, but not like so much that now I can't play them because they're so freaking hard, I don't have that kind of time to sit there and really beat a game like that, so I want to kind of cheat with save states, and I'm sorry if some of you are upset by that. But that's not what Rabbit Frog is asking about. I guess that was just an interesting little aside. Apologize. Rabbit Frog is asking for the ability to save anytime, and that's got to be a feature of any new console. I think this is awesome. I am advocating this 100%. If there's a new console of any color and any sort, this goes for the Wii U or anything else that's going to come down the pike, it needs to be able to save your game at any particular point in time, and you can jump right up on it at that same exact point when you reload it again. Is that so much to ask, guys? I don't think so. Necrom23 mentioned something I think that's very pertinent to the audience of this website, for all of you Clan of the Grey Wolfers out there, and that is that, really, Necrom is spending more money on retro games these days than on new games. Well, I wish that were the case for me. It's not, because I do, I don't spend a ton of money on video games, guys, but I do buy a lot of newer games that really strike my fancy. I do spend money on games that are older, but, if it were up to me, I think you're probably right. I would be able to go through the back catalog of video games to this point and be happy for the rest of my life. That might make me a crotchety old person. But remember this. Remember when, your parents or something, kind of stopped taking in pop culture to a certain point and kind of like, okay, I know this and I'll be happy listening to this stretch of time for the rest of my life. I kind of feel that way about video games now. Like if video games stopped right now, I'm not saying I'd be really happy, but I'm saying that I could get by just playing the back catalog of games that I've seen to this point. Trust me. I think many of you out there would probably echo those sentiments. And those of you that haven't played a lot of the old games, say that Root talks about in 16-Bit Gems, or that I've spoken about here on the Weekly Wringer, or on the Echo Screen, or whatever the case might be, I invite you to go and play some of those games. They are the best games of all time, or at least, in Root's case, he's giving some very valuable games from an often celebrated generation of consoles. So take a look into those. I think that's a good point. I think a lot of us who have money, who were born and raised in the 80s, and came of age with video games, want to see some of those older games. Whether it's not, I don't need an HD remake, just some of the same game. I'll buy it again, just like we were talking about with Star Wars. I'll go see the same movie again. Just show the damn thing the way it should be. Don't try to muck it up or make it into something that it's not. Just make it what it is and make it good again. Excuse me. And I don't have my handy-dandy Clan of the Grey Wolf mug to have a drink this week. Many of you talked about product placement, and I apologize that you couldn't actually go buy the mug because they are actually out of print. Male White Mage mentioned this last week. We had to update the store. I think that we will probably be doing some product stuff moving forward for the store in the future, but at least for right now. Any of the old product stuff, if you got it, good for you. If you didn't get it, you'll never see them again. It's the unfortunate truth of it all. Apologies. But that's hopefully we'll be able to get some of that in the future. Anyway, missing my wonderful Clan of the Grey Wolf mug. I knew I should have got it before I started today. Lashida talked about the fact that the world is not really ready for all digital download format. And I think that's probably true. It's a difficult time in video gaming because we're really right in the middle of an evolution to being full-on content delivery. Something like Netflix works really well for folks that have the internet connection to handle it and don't mind really spending the time, without going and actually buying a DVD. Don't mind just kind of watching it in slightly less good quality format through an internet connection on a TV. I think that model could work great for games, but there are still a great number of folks out there that are working on, disc-based games all over the world. If you look at some of the countries all over the world that don't even have access to some of the newer generation of consoles, they're still going strong on PS1, PS2, PS1 even, because those games are so wonderfully prevalent there, and they can be, I guess, well received by those folks, and obviously a lot cheaper. But if you take even that out of the equation, folks need to have disc-based stuff, and I think we're not going to see the end of that for a long time coming. The primary means of consumption for home movie viewing is still disc-based. If you got that whole sentence, God bless you. Anyway, the point is, people still need to be able to play DVDs. They still need to be able to play Blu-rays, and I don't think there is going to be an end in sight for something like that. I believe that will be something that continues far into the future. I happen to agree with Lashida in that case. In case you guys can't tell, allergy season is definitely upon us with springing. So I'm definitely got a little something in the back of my throat. Anyway, let's see. Troy Loza Tomata talked this time about really bringing something. I think, a lot of people say, oh, it's the economy, stupid, right, when talking about American politics. Troy Loza Tomata basically says, it's the games, stupid, right? And this is something that many people echo the sentiments of, right? It is all about the games. So if there's going to be a new console or there's not going to be a new console, who cares? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the games. I think it's absolutely true. A platform does live and die many times, not by virtue of its speeds and feeds, its prowess, its power, whatever. It succeeds or fails based on the catalog of games available for it. And I don't think this generation or the next generation of consoles will be any different in that regard. It's just a fact of life. We need to see great games for those platforms. One of the reasons why the Wii has sold so well, even though it's losing money now and Nintendo's having a very hard time making ends meet at the moment, but one of the reasons it has such great success is because its catalog of games have been wonderful. And I see some of the games that are coming for Wii, and I see, man, this is great. They're creating great games that are going to be, that I hopefully will sustain the platform for a long time. And they're the usual suspects, guys. It is the Zeldas, the Kirbys, the Marios. But now we see something like Kid Icarus, which I think has a lot of potential as well, which is coming out for the 3DS. Played a little bit of that at PAX East last year. Thought it was awesome. So, it's all about the games. Whether a new system comes in or not, it's all about the games, and I think that's absolutely true. Chris Pranger talked about the idea of, just love to see, now that we've kind of established ourselves, we've had these manufacturers of consoles kind of beating it out together for an entire generation now. Really, when it gets down to it, although you could make an argument that the last generation wasn't so cut and dry. But why don't we just let's see what happens with another round. Because this round has been really interesting. You've seen two consoles that started life in a way that I think was very much catering toward the traditional video game crowd, now really changed the way that they do a lot of things and are really very different. And I think that if we kind of watch those cycles continue, I think we'll see a lot of really cool stuff. And I think Prangerade's onto something there. Let's just see them all duke it out. Let's see somebody crash and burn hard. I'm not saying we're seeing that from Nintendo. Nintendo's obviously still going strong. We'll see what happens with the Wii U and whether they make a run at some of the more traditional game folks, which I think is a very big possibility. We can see the resurgence of Nintendo as a primetime major, and not just a primetime player, but the primetime player, which I think they will demonstrate themselves to be. But it's crazy now that we see ourselves with Nintendo running away as odds on selling the most consoles, but in terms of making the most money, Microsoft is probably going to end up winning this generation, if not coming close. But what's crazy, guys, whether or not that's happened, PlayStation has really had probably the worst generation they've had.